Easily my favorite part of Black Adam was the Justice Society of America. Dr. Fate looked amazing, Hawkman was badass, and had a great rivalry with Black Adam. And while the others, Atom Smasher and Cyclone, they didn't really do much, they didn't really add much to the story, it's undeniable that at the very least their powers look cool, and I think Atom Smasher's costume was cool as well. A lot of things can spin off from Black Adam, like a Superman Black Adam showdown, a Shazam vs. Black Adam movie, or honestly just a Superman movie because we haven't seen him in a very long time. But the JSA is easily the movie slash sequel slash spin-off from Black Adam that I want to see the most. At this point, however, the JSA isn't really much of a team, it's more of a trio of characters with only really one competent member, but I expect the next time we see them, hopefully in their own movie, the JSA will have many more members, as they typically do. The team that we saw in Black Adam was comprised of 2 veteran members and 2 rookie members, both of whom were legacy characters, meaning they took up the mantle of previous members of the JSA, or at least have some sort of connection to them. Atom Smasher replaced his uncle Al Pratt, an original member of the Justice Society, who was called Atom Smasher in the movie, while in the comics he's actually called the Atom, he's the original Atom. I don't really mind this change, as Al Pratt being called the Atom does probably make people assume that he's connected in some way to Ray Palmer, and that he could possibly shrink, which he can't, so I don't mind this change. In the comics, Al Pratt was just a slightly short man who also has super strength, while Atom Smasher doesn't technically have any familial relation to him, which is another change, and with the completely different power of growing, as Al puts it in the movie. Then there's also Maxine Hunkle, aka Cyclone, who doesn't technically take up the mantle of somebody else, but she is related to a member of the JSA. She's the granddaughter of Abigail Hunkle, aka the original Red Tornado. She's not a prominent member of the JSA at all, but she is referenced in a blink and you'll miss it Easter egg in Cyclone's introduction scene, so we can assume that she was a member of the JSA. With all that in mind, I think going forward they're probably going to continue with this trend. The JSA will undoubtedly grow and will have more members in a movie either focused on them or as side characters in a movie that isn't focused on them, but I'm assuming it's going to continue being comprised of half veteran and older members who come out of retirement, and the other half will be new members, mostly young characters taking over the roles of the original JSA members. The only problem with this concept is that a lot of those legacy characters are already being used in another JSA on Stargirl. Characters like Yolanda Montez, Rick Tyler, Beth Chappell, and Stargirl herself are the main characters of that show and the main members of the JSA. The problem here is that DC has this really big problem against using characters that they use in movies and characters that they use in TV shows, usually giving priority to the movies over the TV shows. It's possible that by the time the JSA movie comes out, the Stargirl TV show will be over already. But regardless, I think in this instance it actually does make sense to focus more so on the characters that they didn't use in Stargirl, rather than giving us another iteration of the characters we saw tons of on Stargirl, most of whom were done very well. I'd rather see more characters that haven't been done well yet, before we get back to the characters that we saw on Stargirl, which we could easily see in a sequel to the first JSA movie. So, with all that in mind, what would the first Justice Society movies lineup look like? Obviously, we already have Hawkman, Atom Smasher, and Cyclone, and not Dr. Fate, because sadly he was killed off in his first appearance. I didn't love that. I didn't like the fact that they killed him off so soon. However, I don't think they should bring him back because that would cheapen that death, and that would make the ending of Black Adam really, really bad. However, just because Kent Nelson is dead, that doesn't mean Dr. Fate has to be. In fact, that pretty much means they have to replace him, and there are a lot of options from the comics. There have been a good amount of Dr. Fates. A first option is Hector Hall, who is actually Hawkman's son, so that connection between Dr. Fate and Hawkman of being best friends in the movie, that would actually work really well. This is a character who has connections to every corner of the DC universe. He is Dr. Fate, he was Sandman at one point, and has a large connection to Dream. He is the son of Hawkman, and his wife is a version of the daughter of Wonder Woman. So that could really work for connecting the universe together through this one character. But age-wise and timeline-wise, it doesn't really make sense because Carter Hall is like 30-something in this universe, and for him to have a son, unless he's a teenager, it wouldn't really make sense. Obviously, Hawkman reincarnates, so a previous life can definitely have a child who is the same age as Hawkman himself, or even older. but then he wouldn't be named Hector Hall because Hawkman's previous lives are not Carter Hall. So while I do think this can work if they change things here or there, I think there are better options. There's a more relevant and more recent character and version of Dr. Fate that I think they are probably going with. Before I get to that though, let's go over all the other options, characters who have been Dr. Fate. There's Kent's wife, Inza Kramer. There's his great-nephew, Kent V. Nelson. There's also a duo of Dr. Fates, Eric Strauss and his stepmother, Linda Strauss. There's Thrall and Khalid Ben Hassan from Earth 2, plus tons of other characters who have been Dr. Fate in Young Justice, and a guy named Steel Maxim in the DC animated movie universe. So, which version of Dr. Fate do I think they're going with? Well, like I said, the most recent and most relevant version of the character who isn't Kent Nelson, and that's Khalid Nassauer, who's an Egyptian-American and a much younger version of Dr. Fate. He actually first debuted as the previously mentioned Khalid Ben Hassan on Earth 2, before they introduced him as Khalid Nassauer on the Prime Earth. I don't know why they changed his last name, but he is the most relevant non-Kent Nelson Dr. Fate currently, so that's probably where they're going with the Dr. Fate character. I actually think that Dr. Fate and this character, they should get their own movie or their own maybe HBO Max show before being brought into the JSA and before the JSA movie comes out, because I think that him learning his powers and trying to communicate with Nabu would probably take up a lot of screen time, and there wouldn't really be room for the rest of the team. I think it's inevitable that Hawkgirl would be brought onto this team. She was actually supposed to be in Black Adam, but she was written out of the script for some undisclosed reason and replaced with Cyclone. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, the way Hawkman and Hawkgirl work is that they get reincarnated each time they die, and always spend each one of their lives searching for each other until they find each other, and along the way they both usually become superheroes, Hawkman and Hawkgirl. They don't actually age slower like a lot of the other JSA members do, so it can be assumed that the current Hawkman is reincarnated from the Hawkman that was on the original JSA, and that wasn't Carter Hall, as Aldous Hodge is like 35, so I'm assuming Carter Hall is also like 35, but the original JSA had a different Hawkman, his previous reincarnation, and Hawkgirl was also probably on the JSA, but she also probably died, and they just haven't found each other yet in this life. Maybe Hawkgirl hasn't remembered her previous life yet in this universe. So you could technically say that she is a legacy character, but if you say that, then Hawkman is as well. Regardless, it doesn't really matter. I do think that Hawkgirl is 100% going to be appearing in the JSA's next appearance. It's really just a matter of which version of Hawkgirl, because she has, like Hawkman, had a lot of alternate identities. There's Shiera Hall, there's Shiara Sanders, and there's Kendra Saunders, who I think is the one they're going with, because like Khalid Nassauer, she is the most relevant and most recent version of the character. And I think the final legacy character that I would bring in, making a total of 4 on the team, is Michael Holt, aka Mr. Terrific, who has been used in live action. He did appear on Arrow with his name changed to Curtis for some reason, but that wasn't exactly a good or even beloved interpretation of the character. Here he'd be a lot more serious and much more intelligent, and he'd make all of the tech for the JSA and would be the best member of the team at stealth. I really want to see Mr. Terrific done right on screen and as a member of the JSA. I think that also his personality would probably clash well with Hawkman in this movie, as both of them are really rich as well. Hawkman isn't typically rich in the comics. It does make sense for him to be rich because he's had thousands of years to accumulate wealth, but Mr. Terrific is rich as well, so those two characters clashing would probably make sense. So as for the veterans, I would start with Jay Garrick, aka The Flash. It might feel a bit weird since he's never been mentioned before, as The Flash, you would expect, would be a big fan of Jay Garrick, Barry Allen that is. But then again, the JSA were never mentioned either, and they were pretty seamlessly retconned into this universe, so they could do the same thing with Jay. He is a fundamental member of the JSA who we've really barely seen as a member of the team. We saw him as a member of the JSA in live action in a single flashback episode on Stargirl, where they really just talked. They didn't get into any fight scenes, and that's the entirety of it. That's not to say we haven't seen this character at all, because we have seen him a lot on The Flash, and played perfectly by John Wesley Shipp, which would be very, very big shoes to fill, but we've never seen him as a member of the JSA, at least not properly. The way you could explain him still being active is pretty easy. It's what they did in the comics. His aging's been slowed down because of the Speed Force, plus the Speed Force just makes him more energetic, it gives him more energy. He could be a 90-something-year-old man, maybe 100 years old, but played by a 50 or 60-year-old actor, who could possibly have been brought out of retirement being inspired by the new Flash, combined with the death of Kent Nelson. Now, while we've seen a lot of Jake Garrick in live action, we've barely seen any of Alan Scott outside of like short cameos on Smallville and Stargirl. We were supposed to get a lot of him in his true live action debut in the HBO Max show Green Lantern, played by Jeremy Irvine. But that show's been redeveloped to focus on Jon Stewart, and Alan Scott alongside Guy Gardner will not be appearing. So I think even more so than Jay, Alan Scott should definitely be brought onto this version of the JSA. He'd also be a 90 or 100-year-old man whose magic lantern would slow down his aging slightly less than Jay's. So his actor would be like 10 years older than Jay's actor. He would also be convinced to come out of a retirement inspired. I mean, I would say the new Green Lantern, but this universe doesn't actually have a Green Lantern. So let's just say his best friend Jay Garrick, he came out of retirement and that inspired Alan Scott to do so as well. Alan actually has two child heroes in the comics named Jade and Obsidian, and I'd love to see them on this version of the JSA. I think they'd fit very well, but I'd save them for the sequel. And finally, the last returning member would be Ted Grant, also known as Wildcat, who would also be around 90 or 100 years old, and would also, like the first two members, be established to have de-accelerated aging, alongside the power of having 9 lives to keep him young. I could definitely see them establishing early that he's died like 6 or 7 times and he only has 1 or 2 lives left, and then he also dies in this movie, just so that he's not completely immortal and he feels like he could die, but also because he's like 100 years old, so it would be a lot more realistic. I included Wildcat here because he's another character who's never really been done well before in live action. He was on Arrow during season 3, but he was so forgettable that he was completely written out after that season and we never saw him again. And while he does appear in Stargirl, it's very, very brief and only ever in flashbacks. I'd really like to see a legitimate version of Wildcat who could be like the hand-to-hand combat, street-level, Batman-like character for the JSA. They would probably have to up his power set so that he could be on the same level, so maybe he has cool gadgets that Mr. Terrific made for him, but the fundamental aspects of this character would still remain. But that does beg the question of what happened to all the other previous members of the JSA, and I just say that it's pretty easy to explain that most of the JSA is dead, considering they were active, I'm assuming, during World War II, which means that 80 years ago, they'd all be like at least 100 years old. It would make sense that most of them would be dead, and the only ones who aren't are either just crazy old, and you know, people do live to 100, it does happen, or they have de-accelerated aging, they get reincarnated, or even resurrected, and they could possibly even still be active, but most of them were just regular people who had some sort of superpower, or they just had some sort of gadget. They didn't age slower, so they'd be really, really old, or just dead. So in conclusion, the JSA in a potential JSA movie should be comprised of Hawkman, Hawkgirl, The Flash, Green Lantern, Wildcat, Dr. Fate, Cyclone, Atom Smasher, and Mr. Terrific, with other characters like Jade, Obsidian, Rick Tyler, Beth Chapel, Stargirl, and either Yolanda Montez or Tomcat being introduced later on in the sequels. Now, I don't necessarily think that they'd go exactly with what I went with, but if they are making a JSA movie based off Black Adam, I think that's the type of team they're going with, a mix between old and new, and going off that premise, this is what I would love to see, and it'd be a huge shame if they never make anything with that, if they never make a movie with this version of the JSA, it would be such a waste. So let me know in the comments down below what you would want to see, which characters would you remove, and which characters would you add. And if you want to add anything else, let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.